Chapter 294. When Su Qin fought with the three primordial soul stage-old ancestors, the area covered by the aura alone was more than 100 miles. How big was the movement? Even ordinary mortals could faintly feel it, let alone the other old ancestors who had been secretly watching from afar. Therefore, not long after the fall of the three primordial soul stage-old ancestors, the news had already spread to many major sections. Coupled with the return of the legends from the source of fire, this news could not be suppressed at all. It was like a hurricane sweeping across the overseas martial arts world. Suddenly, the overseas martial arts world was shaken. The fall of three primordial soul stage peak legends in a row was an earth-shattering event no matter which era it was in. Especially not long ago, the Wanjian school was destroyed, and Kanzu also fell because of it. This meant that in a short period of time, a total of 4 primordial soul stage-old ancestors had fallen, and the one who did it was the same person. It was simply shocking. How strong is that legend from the Empire of Tang? Raytheon's old ancestor Lei Xing's strength, even in the primordial soul stage, is considered extremely strong. How could he fall just like that? Before the recovery of the vitality tide, the land of great battle was just a barren continent. How could it give birth to such a powerhouse? It's too terrifying. Such a powerhouse, even in the thousands of years of inheritance overseas, there aren't many, right? Countless overseas legends found it hard to believe. For a long time, the overseas martial arts world had been the absolute center of this world. Even when the vitality tide was still, it could continue to give birth to Earth immortals, which led these overseas martial artists to have a natural sense of superiority when facing martial artists from other continents. But at this moment, with Su Qin's continuous attacks, the overseas legends, primordial soul stage old ancestors continued to fall, and their sense of superiority was shattered without a trace left. So far, many of the major sects overseas have not found a trace of Su Qin overseas, which means that Su Qin is not an overseas martial artist. Could it be that this legend from the Empire of Tang is the reincarnation of a certain Earth immortal? A martial artist was shocked and couldn't help but guess. As long as a martial artist transformed into a primordial spirit, he could use the power of the primordial spirit to be reborn or reincarnate. The primordial spirit of a land immortal had been tempered by the primordial Qi ocean. Compared to the primordial spirit of a peak legend like Patriarch Lei Xing, it was more than dozens of times stronger. For an Earth immortal, reincarnation was just a matter of a thought. However, generally speaking, unless there was no other choice, Earth immortals would not choose to reincarnate. This was because the Millennium Shouyuan of the land immortal was the Shouyuan of the primordial spirit. No matter how many bodies were changed, they could not achieve the effect of prolonging the Shouyuan. Another reason was that the Dharma body of an Earth immortal was precious. If he reincarnated, it would be equivalent to giving up a Dharma body with monstrous Qi and blood. Kuragenkyo. When the Abyss ancestor fell, in the Kuragenkyo, the life fire that belonged to the great ancestor dissipated. Deep within the Kuragenkyo, an earth-shattering roar echoed in the ears of all the Kuragenkyo disciples. Soon after, in front of the Kuragenkyo sacrificial altar, a figure silently appeared. Although this figure stood there, it was as if he was standing in another world. A terrifying and serene aura continuously invaded the surroundings. First ancestor. The Kuragenkyo sect master hurriedly rushed over and was respectful, as if he had seen the faith in his heart. Many of the high sects overseas were basically related to Earth immortals. They were either the orthodoxy left behind by a certain Earth immortal or a disciple who became an Earth immortal and then flourished the sect. Only the Kuragenkyo had never given birth to an Earth immortal. Even so, the Kuragenkyo was still a great sect because of its first ancestor. Due to the flaw in the Kuragenkyo's technique, they were unable to transform their primordial spirit, much less step into the level of Earth immortals. However, the Kuragenkyo's first ancestor opened up a new path and continuously expanded the height of his technique. He even borrowed from some special races in the previous era of the vital Qi tide and transformed himself into these races. What exactly is going on? First Ancestor's cold gaze swept across the Xianxia sect master as he asked indifferently. First Ancestor, Ancestor Yuan, Raytheon, and the two elders of the Snow God Palace besieged the legend of the Empire of Tang. The Xianxia sect master's voice trembled as he hurriedly told him everything he knew. The legend of the Empire of Tang? First Ancestor's voice was still cold, and there was no fluctuation in it. However, the Xianxia sect master, who was kneeling at the side, could faintly feel a chill that seeped into his bones. Snow God Palace. The ice crystal palace on an ice island also started to tremble. A terrifying aura rushed into the sky as if a glacier was descending, intimidating the world. 10,000 Buddha's Hall. The 6th, 7th, and 9th ancestors sat facing each other. A bunch of mortals actually dared to defy the venerable of the world. 6th ancestor sneered. When Su Qin killed the 3 primordial spirit realm elders, he had taken a peek from afar and discovered that it was Su Qin's aura. Why don't we awaken the rest of the 7 ancestors? The 10 ancestors of our 10,000 Buddha Hall will come into being. Who cares about the high sects? We'll enlighten them and serve the venerable of the world. 7th ancestor's tone was filled with rage. Even Buddha had the wrath of a Vajra. When the high sects overseas were besieging Su Qin, one could imagine the fury in the hearts of the 6th, 7th, and 9th ancestors. Su Qin was the Buddha that 10,000 Buddha Hall had been pursuing for decades. If the high sects overseas wanted to deal with Su Qin, it was equivalent to trampling 10,000 Buddha Hall under their feet. There's no hurry. Although 6th ancestor was similarly furious, he still shook his head and said, since the venerable of the world didn't contact us, he doesn't intend for us to interfere. Once he said that, the 7th and 9th ancestors looked at each other and instantly felt that what 6th ancestor said made sense. Although the western desert was extremely far away from the 10,000 Buddha Hall, if Su Qin wanted to contact them, it would only take a moment. The reason why Su Qin hadn't informed them until now must be because he had a plan. If they forcefully intervened and ruined the venerable of the world's plan, wouldn't they be blamed for it? Even if the venerable of the world didn't contact us, we still have to be prepared. As long as the venerable of the world gives the order, we'll let the high sects overseas witness the Buddhist Dharma of reincarnation. 6th ancestor changed the topic and said, that's good. The 7th and 9th ancestors nodded slightly. Raytheon. Lei Xing is dead? I, Raytheon, have overlooked the overseas region for thousands of years. Who dares to provoke me, Raytheon? A certain Raytheon patriarch who had just woken up from a deep sleep couldn't be exposed. In this battle, compared to the Xianxia and the Snow God Palace, Raytheon had suffered the greatest loss. Not only had they lost Patriarch Lei Xing, a powerful primordial spirit expert, but they had also lost a peerless treasure like the Thunder Calamity Wood. One must know that the Thunder Calamity Wood didn't belong to Patriarch Lei Xing, but was jointly owned by all the Raytheon patriarchs. Every 20 years, a patriarch would take away the Thunder Calamity Wood for cultivation. Once the 20 years were up, the Thunder Calamity Wood would be returned. And these 20 years were the 20 years that Patriarch Lei Xing had taken away the Thunder Calamity Wood for cultivation. But now that Patriarch Lei Xing had fallen, wouldn't the Thunder Calamity Wood that had fallen into Patriarch Lei Xing's hands be gone as well? Thinking of this, the Raytheon patriarch who had just woken up had an extremely gloomy expression. The Thunder Calamity Wood was related to the success of one of Raytheon's secret arts. Once the Thunder Calamity Wood was lost, it was equivalent to this secret art being completely cut off. How could he not be angry? As for finding a new piece of Thunder Calamity Wood, the world was vast. Even in the previous era of vitality recovery, there were only a few divine trees that had existed for tens of thousands of years. Those that were ready to go through the Thunder Calamity were even rarer. Even if they failed to go through the Thunder Calamity Wood, there would still be branches left behind that were bathed in the power of thunder, which only existed in legends. Raytheon was lucky enough to obtain a piece of Thunder Calamity Wood by chance. It was already considered a great fortune. Wanting to obtain a new piece of Thunder Calamity Wood was tantamount to a fool's dream. At this time, another patriarch opened his mouth and said, "We will directly use our trump cards to kill our way over and take back the Thunder Calamity wood from the Empire of Tang." This legend of the Empire of Tang is powerful. He was able to destroy the Wanjian school and even kill 3 primordial spirit patriarchs by himself. Even if I, Raytheon, have countless trump cards, if I want to take back the Thunder Calamity wood from such an existence, it would be fine if I succeed, but if I fail, the third patriarch said in a low voice. Although the Thunder Calamity wood was precious, it was inferior to Raytheon's 10,000 years of inheritance. It was obviously not worth it to put Raytheon in danger just for a piece of Thunder Calamity wood. Then contact the Witchcraft sect, Daoist sect, and other high sects to meet this legend of the Empire of Tang together. The eyes of the first patriarch Raytheon were cold and murderous. Many of the high sects had used their trump cards and joined forces to besiege them. Unless it was a real Earth immortal, who could stop them? Just when many of the high sects overseas were shocked by Su Qin alone. At this moment, Su Qin had already walked into the source of fire element. The terrifying fire element Yuan Qi condensed into fire dragons that constantly soared, bursting out an aura that could burn mountains and boil the sea. Not bad. Such rich fire element Yuan Qi, worthy of being the source of fire element. A smile appeared on Su Qin's face. Around him, the fire element power, which was enough to easily burn a legend, was very well behaved. Although Su Qin's great sun painting was only at the beginner level, the 3-legged golden crow was the most powerful divine beast of fire element. Even if Su Qin was only touched by a wisp of the 3-legged golden crow's aura at this moment, ordinary flames couldn't do anything to him. Even the fire element killing array arranged by the Eastern Sea True Lord couldn't hurt Su Qin, let alone the power of fire element. By the way, the sources of the 5 elements are gathered by heaven and earth, and there is a large amount of Dao accumulation. Although this source of fire element was only born at a certain critical point in the recovery of spirit aura, and it hasn't been long, but logically speaking, there should be Dao accumulation for me to sign in. Su Qin's heart suddenly moved, and he thought quickly. Now that the source of fire element was already in front of him, he could devour and absorb it at any time. Compared with this, Su Qin was more concerned about what treasures he could get by signing in at this source of fire element. The last time he signed in at the earth element in the Western Desert, he obtained the earth element technique, Wudu flag, and other treasures. What about this source of fire element? Thinking of this, Su Qin pondered for a moment, then said in his heart, "System, sign in for me. Congratulations to the host for signing in successfully. Obtained Fire Element Pill." Chapter 295. Congratulations to the host for signing in successfully. Received Fire Source Pill. A cold, mechanical voice sounded in Su Qin's ears. Fire Source Pill? Su Qin was slightly stunned. This pill. Su Qin's mind quickly merged into the system space and quickly found a divine pill shining with fire in a corner. In terms of aura, the fire element energy inside is about 10 times that of the Lihua divine pill. Su Qin touched his chin and guessed in his heart. It seems that this place of fire element was formed too recently after all, and it didn't accumulate much Dao accumulation. Su Qin shook his head slightly. According to Su Qin's decades of experience, the treasures obtained the first time in every new sign-in place were often the most precious. For example, the Buddha's palm of the Shaolin Temple, the 12 divine beasts of Immortal Abode Island, and so on. Even the source of the earth element in the Western Desert, which has yet to take shape, gave Su Qin a magical power the first time he signed in. As for the fire element source in front of him, he only got a fire source pill. Of course, this didn't mean that the fire source pill was bad. A fire element divine pill that was 10 times stronger than the Lihua divine pill was enough to make a peak earth immortal like Lord Donghai fight for it. But compared to the reward of at least one divine ability, the fire source pill was obviously not enough. One had to know that divine abilities could grow with the owner. For example, the Eye of Truth that Su Qin obtained when he signed in when he was a 9th-rank martial artist was still an important skill even now. How could a mere pill compare to it? But I'm cultivating the great sun painting, so the more fire element divine pills like this, the better. No matter how much I want, it won't be enough. Su Qin nodded slightly. Even if Su Qin devoured this fire element source and made the great sun painting a minor accomplishment, what about the great sun painting? The fire element energy needed was still as vast as the sea, so this fire source pill wasn't useless. Okay. Next, it's time to cultivate the great sun painting. Su Qin's gaze shifted away from the fire source pill as his expression suddenly turned solemn. The picture of the great sun was the first stone picture of the 12 divine beast pictures. It symbolized the strongest divine beast of the fire element, the three-legged golden crow. Once Su Qin mastered the picture of the great sun, he could easily transform into the three-legged golden crow. Of course, with Su Qin's current strength, even if he really transformed into the three-legged golden crow, he would only be in the state of a cub. It was impossible for him to immediately have the power of a real three-legged golden crow that could burn the world. Otherwise, cultivating the picture of the great sun would not only require fire attribute divine pellets. But even if it was just a cub, the cub of a divine beast was enough for Su Qin to easily crush most Earth immortals. Earth immortals like true Lord Donghai were naturally suppressed. In front of Su Qin, he couldn't even raise his head, let alone resist. However, if I devour this fire elemental source and use it to strengthen my physical body instead of cultivating the picture of the great sun, I might be able to complete the 7th transformation and let my physical body completely enter the Dharma body level. Su Qin's heart skipped a beat. After devouring the earth elemental source in the western desert's 10,000 Buddha Hall, Su Qin's physical body had already reached the peak of the 6th transformation and could be considered to be half a step into the Dharma body level. If he devoured another fire elemental source this time, he might really transform his physical body into a Dharma body. And a Dharma body level physical body would be able to defeat all martial artists below the earth immortal level just by relying on its terrifying qi and blood. It was extremely terrifying. Forget it. I'll just use it to cultivate the picture of the great sun. Su Qin hesitated for a while and gave up on this idea. Although a Dharma body level physical body was terrifying, it was ultimately incomparable to a real earth immortal. And once the picture of the great sun was at minor completion, not only would it allow Su Qin's primordial spirit to integrate into the deeper level of the primordial qi, but after minor completion, he would obtain part of the three-legged golden crow's innate divine ability, which would be stronger than a mere Dharma body. That was the innate divine ability of the three-legged golden crow, the most powerful divine beast. Even if it was just a part of it, it would still be far superior to a mere Dharma body. After all, as long as one entered the earth immortal level and endured the erosion of the primordial qi, their physical body would naturally transform into a Dharma body. But the innate divine ability brought about by minor completion of the picture of the great sun was boundless, and only the three-legged golden crow could possess it. The two were not on the same level at all. Thinking of this, Su Qin slowly closed his eyes. In the depths of Su Qin's mind, a stone diagram that connected heaven and earth began to revolve. On the stone diagram, there seemed to be an eternally burning sun, and in the depths of the sun, there was a faint three-legged divine bird roaring at the sky. Buzz. Just as the stone diagram revolved, among the tens of thousands of light spots on the surface, more than 90 light spots slowly lit up at the edge of the diagram. This was also the effect of Su Qin continuously consuming fire elemental divine pills and demonic pills over the past few decades. If one light spot lit up, it was the beginning of the picture of the great sun. Then hundreds of light spots lit up, it was the minor completion of the picture of the great sun. As for the tens of thousands of light spots on the stone diagram, it was the great completion of the picture of the great sun. On that day, Su Qin would completely master the picture of the great sun and obtain all the innate divine abilities, and physical body of the three-legged golden crow. Boom! As the great sun stone diagram revolved, the endless fire elemental energy in the fire elemental source turned into fire dragons and poured into Su Qin's body. And on the picture of the great sun, A dim light began to slowly light up as the fire elemental energy poured in. In just a moment, Su Qin was enveloped by a ball of flame, and in the flame, fire dragons were constantly entwining between Su Qin's hands and feet, constantly fusing into Su Qin's body, causing his aura to become more and more scorching, as if a newly born sun was sleeping. Time passed slowly. The time Su Qin spent in seclusion this time far exceeded the time spent when he devoured the earth elemental source. Devouring the earth elemental source was when Su Qin integrated all the earth elemental energy into his body. Coupled with the fact that the earth elemental source had yet to take shape, the earth elemental energy it contained was far inferior to the fire elemental source. A year passed in the blink of an eye. In this year, the old man Fei Yu had been patiently guarding the fire elemental source. His aura has weakened again? The old man Fei Yu raised his head and looked at the flame mountain range in front of him, thinking silently in his heart. If it was said that the fire elemental energy contained within the fire mountain range was boundless like a vast sea of fire a year ago, then now, it was at least 10 times weaker. The boundless fire elemental energy seemed to have been swallowed into an abyss as it continued to decrease. Why hasn't the Lord come out of seclusion yet? Those great sects are probably about to make their move. A trace of anxiety flashed across the old man Fei Yu's face. During this year, he personally felt one vast aura after another descending from the sea to the land of great battle, and at the edge of the land of great battle, they were faintly locked onto the empire of Tang. Fei Yu knew very well that they were the ancestors of those great sects. These ancestors had been sleeping for thousands of years with a self-sealing secret technique, and they were all peak legends at the primordial spirit level. There were even several auras that were like heaven and earth, almost half a step into the earth immortal level. Although earth immortals were extremely rare and hard to come by in 1,000 years, there were still some peak legends who had condensed a domain and transformed into a primordial spirit. These peak legends would choose to try to break through to the earth immortal level before the end of Shouyuan's life. Most of the peak legends who failed to break through died on the spot, but there were still some lucky ones who survived by chance. These peak legends who survived did not succeed in breaking through, but during the breakthrough, their primordial spirits had already integrated into the Sea of Vitality, which was equivalent to half a step into the earth immortal realm, and comprehended some of the methods of the earth immortal. Generally speaking, this kind of peak legend was between the earth immortal and the legend martial artist, beyond the legend martial artist, but not the earth immortal. Many martial artists overseas called this realm half-step earth immortal. Although they were not earth immortals, they were only half a step away from earth immortal. Previously, Su Qin's body was equivalent to half a dharma body, and his qi and blood were soaring. Even if he had not broken through to the earth immortal level, he had far surpassed the peak legends, which was equivalent to a half-step earth immortal. This was also one of the strongest foundations of many large sections. In the era where earth immortals did not exist, it was the half-step earth immortals world. However, every half-step earth immortal was a peak legend who had survived after failing to break through to the earth immortal level. Shouyuan was almost exhausted, unlike Su Qin who was full of qi and blood and Shouyuan who was full of qi and blood. But no matter what, a half-step earth immortal was still a half-step earth immortal. Although he was still far from a real earth immortal, the great power he had was beyond the reach of a legend martial artist. The old man Fei Yu did not expect that the large sects would be so desperate this time. They were almost ready to use all of their foundations. One had to know that although a half-step earth immortal was powerful, he could only attack a few times. Is it because my lord has already threatened those large sects? The old man Fei Yu's face was solemn. If it were not for the fact that it was difficult for these half-step earth immortals to awaken and needed time to recover their strength, those large sects would have already attacked them. Even so, the old man, Fei Yu, felt that they wouldn't be able to drag this out for much longer. The earliest would be today, the longest would be a month, and the earliest would be today. At that time, if Su Qin is still in seclusion, with the current strength of the Tang Empire, these major sects will be crushed like a mantis trying to stop a chariot. I hope it's not too late. The old man Fei Yu took a deep breath. With the ruthless means of those large sects overseas, They would definitely not let him go if they really destroyed the empire of Tang. While the situation in the outside world was changing, Su Qin, who was sitting cross-legged in the depths of the fire elemental source, had no idea what was going on. At this moment, Su Qin's body was shrouded in scorching flames. Countless fire elemental energy turned into fire dragons and poured into Su Qin's body and merged with the great sun engraving in his mind. Suddenly, at this moment, a stone engraving suddenly appeared behind Su Qin's back. There were tens of thousands of light spots on the stone engraving. At this moment, there were 99 light spots on the edge of the stone engraving that were emitting a faint light. In addition, as a large amount of fire elemental energy poured in, the 100th light spot slowly lit up. Boom! As if it had broken through a certain shackle, the great sun engraving suddenly shook the moment the 100th light spot lit up. An aura that seemed to have come from the beginning of the primordial age slowly circulated. Chapter 296. Inside the source of fire element. When the 100th light spot slowly lit up on the great sun steel phantom behind Su Qin, the steel suddenly bloomed with a misty brilliance. An ancient and boundless aura filled the air, as if space had frozen and time had been reversed. In an instant, the great sun picture in the depths of Su Qin's mind suddenly burst out with a fire origin that was far deeper and more vast than ordinary flames. I swallowed so many fire attribute divine pills and demonic pills, emptied a large city in the cave world that had been passed down for tens of thousands of years, and finally swallowed an entire source of fire element to achieve minor accomplishment in the great sun picture. I'm afraid it was to condense this kind of origin power. Su Qin closed his eyes slightly, and his mind merged into the depths of his mind, looking at the great sunstone picture that was constantly spewing out a vast amount of fire origin energy. Although there was only a difference of one realm between minor accomplishment and minor accomplishment of the great sun picture. But it was a completely different concept. Minor accomplishment of the great sun picture only gave Su Qin a wisp of the aura of the three-legged golden crow, and it was the aura that had been infinitely weakened by the great sun picture, which allowed Su Qin to have a certain degree of perception and immunity to the power of fire. That was all. Although it was precious, it was not unique. At least in the previous era of the vitality tide, there were many fire attribute treasures that could do the same. However, the minor accomplishment of the great sun picture directly allowed Su Qin to inherit some of the innate magical abilities of the three-legged golden crow. The innate magical abilities of a supreme mythological beast, even the weakest one, were enough to shock the world. In addition to inheriting the innate magical abilities, once he stepped into the minor accomplishment of the great sun picture, Su Qin's body naturally began to undergo some kind of transformation in the direction of the real supreme mythological beast of the fire attribute. Just as Su Qin's thoughts were turning rapidly, the deep and vast origin of fire that gushed out from the depths of the great sun picture quickly merged into Su Qin's body. Boom! Su Qin only felt a sudden roar in his mind, as if he saw the scene of the birth of heaven and earth and the sun in the sky. Immediately after, Su Qin's body continued to be infused with the fire origin. Suddenly, there was a thunderous explosion. His entire body began to swell, as if there was an even more vast power being nurtured inside. My body is being modified? Su Qin's expression changed slightly. Once the picture of the great sun was completed, one would be able to transform into the true supreme divine beast, the great sun golden crow. However, with a human's physical body, to bear the power of a great sun golden crow, even if it was just a cub, it was far from enough. One would need to undergo a transformation from the inside out. This kind of metamorphosis did not completely transform Su Qin into a different race. Instead, it continuously improved the foundation of his human body until he could completely bear the power of the great sun golden crow. Of course, this kind of sublimation was slow, and it started from the small success stage of the great sun diagram, which was why this scene appeared. Just as Su Qin was carefully feeling the changes in his body, boom! Su Qin's hands exploded at the same time. His skin and flesh exploded, but in the next moment, Countless pieces of flesh flew into the air. A large amount of the fire origin continued to pour in, continuously reconstructing Su Qin's flesh and blood. In less than a moment, a pair of white jade-like hands formed again. His 5 fingers were long and slender, and he could vaguely control the fire elemental power in the world. As these hands formed again, the entire fire elemental source shook violently, and countless fire elemental power surged in. This is... Su Qin looked at his newly formed hands in disbelief. These hands were basically no different from before, but there were subtle changes. It was with these changes that Su Qin felt as if he could control the fire elemental power in the world. Previously, although Su Qin could use his domain primordial spirit to control the power of heaven and earth, but that control was forced. Once Su Qin lost his domain primordial spirit, or his strength fell, this control would naturally disappear. But at this moment, when Su Qin formed these hands, he suddenly felt that he had completely transformed into a god of fire. Even if he did not use a trace of his domain primordial spirit, he could still command the fire elemental power. It was extremely incredible. However, in the next moment, Su Qin had yet to react. His 2 arms also exploded, and flesh and blood splattered everywhere. But under the continuous influx of fire elemental power, his arms quickly recovered to their original state, becoming more slender and powerful. Like his hands, they faintly formed a connection with the endless fire elemental power in the world. The soles of his feet exploded, his calves exploded, his thighs exploded, his body exploded, and his chest exploded. Su Qin's entire body began to explode inch by inch, as if he was enduring the cruelest punishment in the world. Even with Su Qin's willpower, he still felt incomparable pain. Under the continuous infusion of the fire elemental power, Su Qin's perception was also infinitely raised. Correspondingly, the pain that Su Qin felt also increased by 10 times or 100 times. This was the change brought about by the initial success of the Great Sun picture. Su Qin's body would begin to transform, reassemble, and recondense under the origin power of the Great Sun picture. Although he was still of the human race, he had already undergone a fundamental change and stood at a height that surpassed the human race. Time passed slowly. Wisps of deep and vast origin power constantly surged out, reconstructing Su Qin's flesh and blood, then his skin and hair. It only slowly stopped when it was almost restored to its original state. At this moment, Su Qin, although he looked the same as before, there were great changes in the subtle areas. Countless subtle changes overlapped with each other, making Su Qin look completely different from before. Like a sun god, his entire body emitted a scorching and violent aura. Especially in between his eyebrows, there was a faint round mark that connected with the endless fire elemental power in the world. Is this the initial success of the Great Sun picture? Su Qin slowly opened his eyes. His pupils were pitch black like a baby's, but in the depths of his pupils, there was a faint burning sun that constantly emitted an extremely terrifying aura. Su Qin stood up and looked at his palm again. His palm was smooth and delicate like a weak scholar's, but when he waved it, the surrounding fire elemental power naturally began to surround it, as if it had seen an emperor and prostrated itself in worship. At this moment, my body has probably been completely promoted to a Dharma body. Su Qin sighed softly, and an inexplicable emotion appeared on his face. The Dharma body that he had always desired was actually naturally achieved after the initial success of the Great Sun picture. Now, my body should have already surpassed the category of a Dharma body. It's more appropriate to call it the Golden Crow Divine Body. Su Qin thought silently in his heart. Ever since the initial success of the Great Sun picture, some additional memories appeared in his mind. These memories were similar to inherited memories that appeared out of thin air, but were deeply rooted in Su Qin's mind, as if he had experienced them before. In these new memories, Su Qin knew that his current body had been modified by the origin of fire and was completely different from an ordinary Dharma body that had been washed by a sea of vitality. It was more inclined towards the Golden Crow Divine Body. The so-called Divine Body was a type of constitution, which was equivalent to another direction of a Dharma body. It's a pity that although the Great Sun picture is already at the initial success level, it's still very far away from the real great success level. Su Qin's mind entered his mind and glanced at the Great Sun picture that connected the heavens and the earth. On the stone picture, there were tens of thousands of light spots, and at this moment, among these tens of thousands of light spots, 100 light spots at the edge had been completely lit up, which was also the sign of the initial success level of the Great Sun picture. Next, if Su Qin wanted to reach the final success level of the Great Sun picture, he would need to light up the remaining 9,900 light spots as well. According to the experience that Su Qin had from lighting up 100 light spots, the resources needed to cultivate the Great Sun picture to the final success level would be 100 times more than the initial success level of the Great Sun picture. And according to Su Qin, it took him more than 10 years to barely cultivate the Great Sun picture to the initial success level. If he wanted to continue cultivating it to the final success level, it would take him more than 1,000 years to sign in. Of course, it wasn't calculated like that. As Su Qin's strength continued to grow, he was qualified to go to more dangerous places to sign in, and the gains he obtained were naturally far from what he had before. But even so, according to Su Qin's estimation, it would take decades or even 100 years for him to reach the final success level of the Great Sun picture. Let's see what changes there are in the initial success level of the Great Sun picture. Su Qin slowly closed his eyes and felt all the movements in all directions. He didn't use his domain, nor did he use his primordial spirit. Just relying on his physical perception, he continued to spread out into the distance. Suddenly, under Su Qin's 5 senses, the whole world was different. He could control the power of fire and feel every little thing within a radius of hundreds of miles. From the aura of a legend to the low cries of ants and flies, everything seemed to be close to his ears. Even Su Qin felt that his body seemed to have completely integrated with the endless power of the 5 elements. Even if he was sleeping, a large amount of fire element power continued to pour into his body, slowly improving his cultivation. It is recorded in ancient books that some divine beast cubs don't need to cultivate at all. They just need to sleep all day, and when they reach adulthood, they will naturally have the power to destroy the world. Su Qin opened his eyes with a look of amazement. Originally, he thought that this saying was just a rumor. How difficult is it to cultivate one step at a time? How can it be possible to improve one's cultivation just by sleeping? But now, through his own feelings, Su Qin had already believed most of it. He was now only at the small success level of the Great Sun picture, and only obtained a part of the 3-legged golden crow's innate divine ability, but it had such a slow improvement effect. How terrifying would the cubs who had truly inherited all the innate divine ability of the divine beast be? But this kind of improvement is not suitable for me. It's too slow. Su Qin shook his head slightly and thought silently. According to his current speed of improvement, even if he did nothing and just slept, in another few hundred years, he would naturally enter the Earth immortal realm. But a few hundred years was probably enough for Su Qin to break through to a higher realm. Why waste it on sleeping? And that sun. Su Qin slowly raised his head and looked at the sky. Although there was the obstruction of the fire element source, Su Qin could still feel the burning sun hanging in the sky. At this moment, Su Qin looked at the sun, and a desire rose in his heart, wanting to get closer to the sun that seemed to be burning eternally. Of course, Su Qin stopped himself in time. Su Qin knew in his heart that the reason why he had this feeling was entirely because after cultivating the Great Sun picture, especially after the small success level of the Great Sun picture and the transformation of his body into the Golden Crow divine body, it produced an unrealistic instinct. How high was the temperature of the sun? Although Su Qin had reached the small success level of the Great Sun picture, he was still not a real 3-legged golden crow and was far from being able to withstand the temperature of the sun. That's right. After the small success level of the Great Sun picture, I should be able to obtain some of the 3-legged golden crow's innate divine ability. Su Qin suddenly thought of something, and his eyes suddenly lit up. The Golden Crow divine body was a natural transformation after the small success level of the Great Sun picture, so it should not be counted as an innate divine ability. In other words, in addition to the Golden Crow divine body, Su Qin should have mastered at least one other divine ability. One had to know that Su Qin had thoroughly enjoyed the benefits of divine abilities. Su Qin had signed in for decades and only obtained a few divine abilities. From this, one could see how precious divine abilities were. Thinking of this, Su Qin slowly closed his eyes and felt the aura in his body. In his meridians, true essence flowed like a river. This true essence faintly revealed a scorching aura, like burning fire dragons, constantly flowing in Su Qin's body. Su Qin had a feeling that the destructive power of his true essence should have greatly increased at this moment. If an ordinary peak mythical creature was slightly touched by his true essence, their entire body might be ignited. It's understandable that my true essence is approaching the fire element. After all, my current body is already the Golden Crow divine body, so it's normal for it to affect the attributes of my true essence. But I want to know, in addition to these changes, what kind of divine ability has the small success level of the Great Sun picture brought me? Su Qin was looking forward to it. For divine abilities, the more the better. No one would complain about having too little. I don't need the Grand Sun primordial flame or the Inferno Emperor's indestructible body. Just give me an offensive fire element divine ability. Su Qin thought silently in his heart. Among the few divine abilities that Su Qin had mastered, they were basically all ancillary. The only divine ability that could barely be considered offensive was the Wind and Rain Summoning Technique, which was also a group attack divine ability. It had a miraculous effect against those weaker than Su Qin, but against powerhouses of the same level, it didn't have much of an effect. Rumble, when Su Qin's mind completely integrated into his body, suddenly, the slowly burning great sun in the depths of his eyes rose rapidly. The terrifying heat increased rapidly, and even the fire element source near Su Qin began to melt. Su Qin hurriedly stopped activating the divine ability and focused his mind on his eyes. Divine ability? Su Qin's heart trembled slightly. Strictly speaking, the Eye of Truth was also an divine ability, but the function of the Eye of Truth was only to observe qi and couldn't increase Su Qin's strength. But the divine ability that Su Qin activated just now was terrifying to the extreme. Before it was completely activated, it could already merge with the fire element source, which was simply shocking. One had to know that the fire element source was the convergence of the fire element power between heaven and earth. Logically speaking, its tolerance for flames should be extremely high, but at this moment, it was quickly melting. This showed how terrifying this divine ability was. Not bad, not bad. Su Qin looked satisfied and turned his head to look outside. The Great Sun picture has reached the small success level. There's no need to stay here anymore. It's time to leave. Su Qin took a step and disappeared on the spot. P.S. It's equivalent to 2 in 1. Chapter 297. Outside the fire elemental source. Elder Fei Yu was sitting cross-legged. Suddenly, at this moment, Fei Yu seemed to have discovered something. He suddenly raised his head and looked at the fire elemental source. Elder Fei Yu's face changed slightly. At this moment, the fire elemental source that was originally filled with dense fire elemental power had completely quieted down. Countless fire elemental power quickly converged and finally gathered on a figure that had appeared at the entrance of the source. Sir? Elder Fei Yu looked at the tall and slender figure. He immediately opened his eyes wide in disbelief. At the entrance of the fire elemental source, there was a handsome man standing there. The man stood there quietly and began to guide the vast and endless sea of primordial qi in the depths of the void. In his eyes, there was a faint burning grand Sunday. The man's appearance was 90% similar to Su Qin in Fei Yu's memory. However, there were slight changes. It was because of these slight changes that caused the man's temperament to suddenly change. He was like a burning sun god. Perfect. But it's me. Su Qin glanced at Fei Yu and said indifferently. Although his voice was still the same as before, it had become deep and powerful. When Elder Fei Yu heard it, he actually felt that his blood and true origin had the tendency to burn. It's really, sir? Elder Fei Yu was dumbfounded. He quickly calmed himself down and suppressed his qi and true origin. There was a huge wave in his mind. In just a short year, Su Qin appeared in front of him as if he had been reborn. That's right, the only thought in Fei Yu's mind was to be reborn. If the previous Su Qin was like an abyss that was unfathomable, then now he was like the grand sun in the sky, burning fiercely as if he could burn the heaven and earth. Fei Yu would never have thought that there would be someone in the world who would undergo such a huge change. If it wasn't for the great similarity between Su Qin's eyebrows, he would have thought that they were two different people. In fact, Fei Yu was not wrong. Su Qin had indeed been reborn. After the grand sun picture was completed, the fire elemental source had completely transformed Su Qin's body. Now, although Su Qin still had his original body, it had been reorganized by the fire elemental source and became the Golden Crow divine body. Congratulations, sir, for stepping into the Earth immortal realm. Elder Fei Yu thought quickly and immediately knelt down and congratulated him. Su Qin's transformation was simply too great. From inside to outside, even his temperament had changed. Aside from the legends, there was no other possibility for him to break through the shackles of the myth realm and enter the land god realm. Only a breakthrough of such a large realm could completely change a person. Earth immortal? Su Qin pondered for a moment, looked at his hands, and shook his head. I'm not an Earth immortal yet. Not Earth immortal? Elder Fei Yu blinked and didn't react for a long time. Although I'm not an Earth immortal, but... Su Qin clenched his fist and a strange light appeared on his face. Even if a real Earth immortal comes, I can still fight him. The small success of the Great Sun painting was of great help to Su Qin. Originally, Su Qin thought that the Grand Sun picture could only allow him to exchange 2 blows with an Earth immortal. But now, with the condensation of the Golden Crow divine body and the awakening of the Fire Elemental Eye divine ability, Su Qin was confident that he could even fight an Earth immortal. In the state of the Golden Crow divine body, Su Qin's strength, speed, and defense had increased by many times. His qi and blood were majestic like the ocean. Even an Earth immortal's domain could not suppress it. Thinking of this, a smile appeared on Su Qin's face. Although he had all kinds of trump cards before, there was no lack of divine scriptures that could reach the level of an Earth immortal, such as the Buddha's palm. But in the end, it only reached the level of an Earth immortal in terms of power. But now, Su Qin had stepped into the realm of an Earth immortal in all aspects. His every move was like a real Earth immortal. Of course, this did not mean that the Buddha's palm was inferior to the 12 divine beasts picture, but that the two were good at different aspects. Cultivating the 12 divine beasts picture to the extreme could only allow Su Qin to transform into a divine beast and grasp all the power of a divine beast. But that was not the case for the Buddha's palm. The power of the Buddha's palm could be infinitely increased. If both were cultivated to a deeper level, the Buddha's palm would be stronger. To put it simply, in the early stage, the 12 divine beasts picture gave Su Qin a greater improvement, but in terms of the real upper limit, the 12 divine beasts picture was weaker than the Buddha's palm. However, I can't maintain the state of the Golden Crow divine body without any restrictions. I need to consume qi and blood? Su Qin carefully sensed his body and deduced. Under the Golden Crow divine body, Su Qin's speed, strength, and defense had increased by dozens or hundreds of times. His qi and blood were vast, but it was not without a price. Instead, it was slowly consuming Su Qin's qi and blood. At this rate, Su Qin's qi and blood would be exhausted in a few months. Forget it. I'd better leave the Golden Crow divine body state. Su Qin's thoughts moved, and the aura in his body began to quickly converge. The great sun that seemed to be burning eternally in his eyes began to slowly extinguish. The origin of fire gathered in the ancestral aperture between Su Qin's eyebrows, turning into a palm-sized 3-legged divine bird that landed on the shoulder of his Yuan spirit. I can quickly return to the Golden Crow divine body state with a thought? Su Qin touched his chin and nodded slightly. At this moment his qi changed again. He returned to his normal state from the dazzling sun god. Sir. The old man next to him blinked and breathed a sigh of relief. Su Qin, who was under the golden crow divine body, gave him a strong sense of oppression, as if he was close to a furnace all the time. Even with Fei Yu's strength as a peak legend, he still felt extremely uncomfortable, as if it was the most essential pressure from the depths of his life. But now, after Su Qin returned to normal, Fei Yu was much more relaxed. Although the pressure was still there, it was no longer as dazzling as before. Let's go back. After Su Qin returned to the golden crow divine body state, he continued to walk slowly toward Chang and city. This time, after devouring a complete origin of fire and the picture of the great sun, it took a year for his body to be transformed. The old man, Fei Yu, immediately followed. Su Qin and Fei Yu returned to the imperial palace. The powerful primordial spirit power swept through and the entire imperial palace appeared in Su Qin's eyes. Not bad. There are dozens more peak grade 1 experts and 3 mythical martial artists. Su Qin raised his eyebrows. During the 1 year he was in seclusion, his vitality tide reached a critical point and rose again. With the blessing of the world, the bottleneck between the 9th grade of martial arts and the myth realm loosened a little, leading to the birth of 3 myth realm martial artists in the palace. Li Wan has also entered the myth realm. Su Qin's expression flashed with a hint of surprise. More than a year ago, Wanjian School brought Li Wan back overseas as a body for Kenzu to possess. In order to make Kenzu's possession more successful, Wanjian School naturally used all means to improve Li Wan's cultivation as much as possible. Countless divine pills and spirit medicines were sent to Li Wan. As a result, by the time Su Qin brought Li Wan back, she was already a grade 1 great grandmaster. However, what Su Qin didn't expect was that in just 1 year, Li Wan had crossed the 4 bottlenecks of her body transformation, divine sense transformation, internal strength transformation, and the ultimate breakthrough and entered the myth realm. Is it because of that sword will? There was a thoughtful look on Su Qin's face. Aside from countless divine pills and spirit medicines, Kenzu had also imbued a sword will into Li Wan's body. That sword will was the legacy Kenzu had obtained from the 10,000 Swords Daoist. That's right. After all, it's a technique left behind by a terrestrial immortal. Su Qin shook his head slightly, immediately understanding. What kind of existence were terrestrial immortals? With the word immortal attached to their name, even if they were not true immortals or gods, their abilities were unimaginable. Wanjian School was originally a small island with a radius of several miles, but because the 10,000 Swords Daoist kept reclaiming land from the sea, the 10,000 Swords Island had expanded into a small continent with a radius of several hundred miles. Such a method was simply beyond the imagination of a myth martial artist. Of course, helping Li Wan transcend the myth realm bottleneck was already the limit of that sword will. After all, this sword will had existed for thousands of years, and the sword progenitor had used up most of it and left the sword will for Li Wan, which had pushed her to myth realm quickly. As for the remaining 9 tiers of myth realm, Li Wan had to rely on herself to get there step by step, and she could not use any tricks to get there. Su Qin's gaze was calm as he took another step forward, and his figure appeared on the stargazing tower in the imperial palace. The stargazing tower was the tallest building in the imperial palace of the Tang Empire. It was the place where the emperors of the Tang Empire used to watch the stars. However, when Su Qin stood there, he was not looking at the stars in the sky, but overlooking the lights of Chang and city. The old man, Fei Yu, was obediently following beside Su Qin, not daring to say a word. Just as Fei Yu thought that Su Qin would keep watching like this. Suddenly, at this moment, Su Qin did not raise his eyes and said leisurely, "You've been watching for so long, why don't you come out and meet me?" Su Qin's words were unusually calm, but in the ears of the old man, Fei Yu, it was no different from a loud bell. "Someone is beside me?" The old man, Fei Yu's scalp tingled, and he carefully looked around. The next moment, under the incredulous gaze of the old man, Fei Yu, a tall man in a simple wizard robe slowly walked out of the darkness. The man's long hair draped over his shoulders, and he was extremely free and easy, as if he had merged with heaven and earth. Even if he stood in front of Fei Yu, he could not feel anything. Who is this person? Fei Yu calmed down, and panic suddenly rose in his heart. However, when Fei Yu thought that Su Qin was beside him, he was slightly relieved. Fellow Daoist, you have good eyesight. The man in the wizard robe looked at Su Qin and said with a smile, Witchcraft, Qing Mang, came uninvited. Greetings, fellow Daoist. The man named Qing Mang bowed slightly to Su Qin. He bowed not because he was afraid of Su Qin, but out of respect and recognition. Witchcraft. Qing Mang? Your Magus Master Qing Mang? When the old man, Fei Yu, heard this name, his mind suddenly rumbled, and he subconsciously exclaimed, I didn't expect that after 2,000 years, there would still be people in the world who can remember me. Qing Mang glanced at the old man, Fei Yu, and said in an extremely gentle tone, Magus Master Qing Mang? Su Qin looked at the man in the wizard robe not far away, and his thoughts fluctuated slightly. He would occasionally listen to the Lao Dao from the Daoist sect talk about overseas matters. Since the end of the last vitality tide, the overseas martial arts world had experienced more than 10,000 years. In these 10,000 years, the most dazzling were the dozen or so land immortals. In every era with land immortals, they dominated the world. Even great sects like the Daoist sect and Raytheon, which had been passed down for tens of thousands of years, did not dare to show disrespect in front of any land immortals. Other than these dozen or so land immortals, the witchcraft master Qing Mang followed closely behind. More than 2,000 years ago, the Qing Mang master Qing Mang appeared out of nowhere and swept through the world. In just 400 years, he had formed his domain and primordial spirit. He was the peak legend of that era who was most likely to become a land immortal. Unfortunately, the Qing Mang master Qing Mang failed to break through in the end. His qi and blood began to weaken, and his primordial spirit slowly collapsed. He fell like a dazzling meteor. However, now it seemed that the Qing Mang master Qing Mang did not die at that time. Instead, he survived and slept until now with a self-sealing secret art. You came alone. Aren't you afraid that I'll kill you? Su Qin was not afraid of the Qing Mang master Qing Mang. Putting aside the fact that the Qing Mang master Qing Mang was no longer in his prime and his qi and blood had weakened, even the Qing Mang master Qing Mang from 2,000 years ago would be torn apart alive if he encountered Su Qin who had the golden crow divine body. Haha. Everyone says that the legend of the Empire of Tang killed wantonly and destroyed sects and cities. His behavior was no different from that of the Xianxia. However, I know that you never attack for no reason. The Wanjian school was destroyed because the Wanjian school captured your descendants. The Qing Mang master Qing Mang laughed. Su Qin raised his eyes and glanced at the Qing Mang master Qing Mang again. He did not expect the Qing Mang master Qing Mang to have such thoughts. However, what the Qing Mang master Qing Mang said was not wrong. Since Su Qin's debut, he had not been afraid of killing. However, the people he killed were those who had provoked him. If I'm not mistaken, you should have touched that barrier, right? The Qing Mang master Qing Mang's eyes flashed as he stared at Su Qin. In the eyes of the Qing Mang master Qing Mang, although Su Qin's body was extremely restrained, there were still wisps of aura that made people's hearts palpitate. Su Qin shook his head slightly and did not answer. Instead, he asked, Qing Mang master Qing Mang, you didn't come here just to meet me, did you? Su Qin looked at the Qing Mang master Qing Mang with a faint smile. Although the Qing Mang master Qing Mang believed that Su Qin would not kill innocent people indiscriminately, how could the Qing Mang master Qing Mang personally take the risk when it concerned his own life? That's right. I did come here for another matter. The Qing Mang master Qing Mang nodded slightly and admitted frankly. When the old man Fei Yu heard this, his heart beat faster. Even if he thought with his feet, he knew that it must be something important for the Qing Mang master Qing Mang to come here personally. Say it. Su Qin looked down at Chang and City and said lightly. It's very simple. The Qing Mang master Qing Mang paused for a while and then said with a solemn face, I'm here to deliver a message to you on behalf of others. It's up to you to decide whether to fight or to make peace. Welcome to Legends of Cultivation, audiobooks. where we bring ancient fantasy to life through storytelling. Follow the rise of heroes who defy fate, unlock mystical powers, and battle across celestial realms. Our audiobooks are crafted for fans of Chinese cultivation novels, filled with battles, breakthroughs, and legendary artifacts. Subscribe and be part of an unforgettable journey into the realm of immortality.